Welcome to the Freedom Fridays podcast. With me, your host, Pete Clark, the Whispers guy. Work seems to expand to the time that we give it. And I've been investing my time, occasionally on a Friday, to explore how we use our time, our energy, our attention, and the impact it has on our identity. I've been exploring over season 1 some of the mindset shifts in the handcuffs of I have to the freedom of I choose to. And I've shared some conversations, some tips, some tools about how you might want to invest your own time, your own energy, your own attention. How you might want to, if you choose to, make some changes to your identity. How you might have freedom from I have to and design a life around I choose to. If that's of interest to you, then this is the podcast for you. In season 2, I'm going to be exploring some experts and asking them what freedom means for them. And trying to help people work to live and not live to work. Trying to help people add life to their years and not just years to their life. So let's dive on in, and here's season 2. Welcome to this episode of Freedom Fridays. Now, my guest this week is actually someone that I believe is living the Freedom Fridays philosophy, where she's convinced herself and committed to, school kids or not, taking the school holidays off, which if I reflect on my own journey of Freedom Fridays, I was going to thinking I was brave taking a Friday off, whereas Gabrielle Dolan, she's taking the whole of the school holidays off. So, Ral, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pete. I'm looking forward to talking about Freedom Fridays and freedom in general.
Cool. So why don't we start there? And the premise around Freedom Fridays in the work that you do, what does freedom mean?
Freedom to me is always choice. That's what freedom to me is. Like, even if you talk about financial freedom, it's about choice. And that to me, it's what true freedom is, because there's a lot of people that don't have choice. They don't have choice in the job they do, and, based for a whole lot of reason. But freedom to me is choice. And I still remember really early on in my early 20s, and I didn't even know whether I wanted to have kids or not. And I remember making financial decisions like superannuation. I remember at the age of 22 putting 17% of my pay in super, which is probably not the greatest financial decision. But I always remember, if I ever decide to have children, I want to have the choice of going back to work. I don't want to have to go back to work because I can't afford not to. And to me, that's what freedom's all about, is choice.
How would you, there's loads of places we can go with that. I'm interested, first of all, given the world that we live in, there are so many choices. You could argue, you go to the supermarket and it's no longer, tea or coffee. It's 100 different brands of tea, left, right, north, south. How do you help or reconcile when there's so many choices?
I love the the FOMO, the fear of missing out. I love that it sort of changed to JOMO, which was the joy of missing out. Oh, and okay. I think because, and you're right, there's so many things you can do. So I live by the philosophy of, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it or you need to do it. So I think you need to have freedom and around your choices. And to me, work-life balance and all that type of stuff is getting good at saying no to things that you just don't. If it doesn't really excite you or energize you, or you get something out of it, then the answer is no. You shouldn't be just doing things out of fear of missing out, or doing things out of expectation that you should do it. So it's been really, I think, just really clear on that doesn't give me energy. So the answer to that is no.
I introduced you as someone that I've, having had a conversation behind the scenes, felt that was someone who was probably living the Freedom Fridays philosophy, where you take the school holidays off. Would you just give us a little bit of background to that, and maybe in 3 parts, a little bit of background, how you came to that commitment and some of the challenges you've had on the way on keeping the commitment.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So Pete, look, I left my corporate job 17 years ago. So I worked at National Australia Bank. So I got the standard, 4 weeks leave. I was working when I left NAB, our kids were like 2 and 5. So I was working part-time. So there was a little bit of freedom there, I guess, and had brilliant managers that allowed me pretty much to do and work as little as I wanted to. But when I left and I started teaching people storytelling. It'd be fair to say that, trying to sell storytelling into corporate 17 years ago, it wasn't very popular back then. So I had quite a bit of time on my hands, and which was fine. The kids were young, all good. That was good. And then as it started to go and as storytelling became really popular, and it got to the point where my husband wanted to leave his corporate job. And I remember thinking, okay, I need to take this quite seriously. I need to be earning now as much money for him to feel comfortable leaving because, he had fully supported me when I left the corporate role. And so I did, and I literally quadrupled the salary, which means I quadrupled my work. And I had a year that I was working a lot and traveling a lot. And it got to the point where I thought, this is good, but not sustainable. And this is not how I envisage what a successful business and life would look like. So I think after I got to the point where financially, we were okay. We were good. And I think because there was so much work coming in from the business, you sort of get over that thing of what if no one buys me ever again? And that stays for quite a few years. So I guess I had the confidence to say, you know what, I think I can just draw a few lines in the sand and some of those things. And I started with not working school holidays. Now, as you know, in Australia, we get like 12 weeks school holidays. So I decided I wasn't going to work school holidays. So because I run training workshops and conferences, some of that's relatively easy because no one's running training on the 20th of December or on the 10th of January. So pretty much from mid-December to almost the end of January, the people that really aren't running training, they're predominantly not running training in the September school holidays as well, because a lot of people take that off. So it did make it a bit easier. I would have clients want me to do training, and I look at my diary and I'm thinking, oh, that's school holidays. And I would say to them, now you realize that school holidays, it could be hard to get people to attend training in school holidays. And they would go, oh, we didn't even think of that. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, that's okay. My pleasure. So it was relatively easy. But there was still some challenges. There was some challenges. So I would often still get requests to run training, and it could even be if I would give dates, it might be the first 1 or 2 days of school holidays or the last 1 or 2 days. So it's not in the middle. So that's it's sort of that interrupts sort of the flow of the holidays. You've got to, it's not just it's a half day. You sort of got to get into the mode of it. There has been times, I remember one time it was early January and it was an overseas client, and because they don't close down as much as we do in January, and it was 3 days, and it was in Vietnam, and it would have meant I probably missed a week of the school holidays, but it was 3 days. It was very good money. It was a really, really exciting project that I wanted to do. It was the start of a long-term project. So I just sat down with the family and said, is this okay? And they went, yeah, absolutely, go for it. So it's I would say I can stick to that sort of rule, I don't know, 90% of the time. And it's only for an exception that I really want to do, or sometimes really want to help out a client, that I will do it.
And have you noticed any material difference in your health and balance having taken that time off, or any difference in the business? Are you as busy, less busy, more busy? What's been the kind of outcome on the other side of that line? Yeah,
so interesting from the business perspective, if I talk at that first, it's actually increased my business in a way that, like, it's a scarcity. So like, you're literally saying I am not available this time. And I must admit, when I first started doing this, I would just say I'm not available. And I didn't give reasons or whatever, but I assume clients just thought I was busy working. I'm quite comfortable now to say I'm not available because I don't work school holidays. But what it meant is, because I wasn't available those days, it just meant, it's a whole scarcity thing. So it was like, well, when are you available? I'm available here. So that actually worked wonders. That actually had a really good positive effect on my business, not working school holidays. And I should also, to Pete, also say is that I only work 3 days a week is my ideal. And I do that because I'm running training.
Sure.
I think if you're running training 5 days a week, you come Thursday or Friday, that is not the best version of you on stage.
You're buggered.
Yeah. So it's a lot of energy. So my ideal week is no more than 3, days. And that could be 3 full days. It could be 3 half days. It could be 3 1-hour keynotes.
Yep.
Which does mean, when you look at my calendar, it probably means about 80 to 100 days a year I'm working, which again, it's scarcity. It's like, I'm not available. It's like, if someone rang me now and said, we want to run training in July, have you got time? I would go, I've got about 3 days available in July. Now, granted, I'm in New York for 2 weeks of that, 2 weeks of July. So it's all genuine. So it's helped with the business. For me, on a personal level, it's absolutely helped with my energy. So giving 100% of yourself on stage in front of people is draining. I love it. I love it. And I'm pumped afterwards, but it is draining long term. Yeah. And so I find the benefit of school holidays, it's sort of like, 10 weeks on, pretty much 2 weeks off, 10 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It roughly turns into 10, maybe 12 weeks. Where when I have the 2 weeks down, it's sort of like I'm itching to get back into it again. So I'm really missing it. So from a personal perspective, it really helps with my energy levels. Yep. And it gives you time to think. It gives me time to write. It's all that stuff. So there are challenges, but I think you just got to commit to it. And for me also, like I remember I was doing some work with like a partner of a consulting firm, and he's one of the partners, so he's in demand. Yep. And I remember him saying, he sort of questioned me. He goes, but like, you can't just say no to a client. Like, when you say you don't work school holidays, if they want you to do it, you can't say, he said to me, how do you say no? And I go, well, if I say yes to them, I'm saying no to my family. And it doesn't matter how much I love my clients and love my work, they're always going to be second to my family. So part of me is like, if you say yes to them, you're saying no to your family. And then he said to me, he goes, yeah, but the problem with me is they really want me and they only want me. And I'm going, surely that should be easier for you to say no. I'm not, like, if they only want you, then they will get them to change their date because they want you. So it is a combination of that. And if someone wants to run a workshop and I go, I'm not available, and I know they're flexible with the dates, then they will change it. Sometimes they've got a conference and it's been booked in and there's no flexibility at all, and they really want me. That's when I go, look, okay, I will do that. But it's the exception, not the rule.
Thank you. I did notice one of your LinkedIn posts about this 10 on, 2 off, 10 on, 2 off, and so on. So I have been reading myself a little bit about, we know from an energetic and attention, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, recovery is as important as warm-up. Right? We know in athletics and professional sport, for the job that we do, having the time to recover is as important as, getting fired up. So with your 2 weeks off, and I know that doesn't mean you're off, but with that 2 weeks off, how do you balance the active recovery aspect versus the passive recovery aspect?
Yes, that is a very good and timely question. And the reason I say that is I could not run a workshop for 2 months. And to me, it is a little bit like riding your bike. You're back into it, but it can take a little bit of time. The longer I've had off, a little bit of time to warm up a little bit. And today was a classic example. So I literally got back from holidays 6 o'clock last night. And I had a workshop this morning. Now, this workshop is not one of the workshops I run all the time. So it has been a while since I've run this workshop, like 3 months or something. But it was also with a New Zealand client. So it was a 7 o'clock start for me. And so I was up at 6, getting ready. And then I just, like, they loved it. They were going, oh my God, this is amazing. But I felt I was like, oh my God, the first half hour, I felt like I was stumbling over things and saying things in different order. Yeah. And I was, you know what, if it had been at 9 o'clock, it probably wouldn't have been an issue. I would have got up at 7. I would have had a bit more time to, just prepare myself. So that's the thing. But I felt I was mumbling a bit, but they probably didn't notice at all. And the feedback indicated that they didn't, well, maybe they did notice, but they certainly wasn't saying. But so it does take a while. And it's the same with keynotes. Like, people will go, oh, you charge that much for a 45-minute keynote. It was like, it's never just 45 minutes. It is like that to me is your whole day getting ready for that.
Yeah, I came across a really good example of that. I'll see if I can find it whilst I'm chatting to you about that and I guess this is the world that we exist in. And it was something around, how can you charge that much for 45 minutes? Mm. And the premise being, well, it's taken me 20 years to get it down to 45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's a time and material thing for some of the clients, but for us, it's well, that's just what it takes to get it to a 45-minute impactful message.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting take.
Yeah, it is. And it's, you're bringing all your decades and experience into that 45 minutes and the insights. And to me, it's also the value you add. It's how much value do you add? I remember my husband said once to me, you charge more than a lawyer. I go, I add more value than a lawyer, which is like,
love it.
Again, it was like, sometimes you do have, very rare, but sometimes, and because budget reasons, like people go, come and train our top 150 leaders on storytelling. So I literally had this a few months ago where they want me to, and it wasn't a keynote, it was a half day training session. The top 150 leaders, they want to be able to communicate their values internally and externally. They want to change their culture to value driven. They want people to understand the strategy. And then I sort of tell them the price for a half day workshop and they go, well, that's a bit expensive. And it was like, it's just like the value I'm giving you. And I sort of say, so hang on a minute, I'm going to make your leaders better communicators. I'm going to help your leaders communicate the strategy more effectively. I'm going to help them communicate the company values that you've just spent 6 months reviewing, help them communicate it. And then I go, and then I always go, actually, I think it's too cheap. I think it's just like, and because I would say, what is that worth? Like, what is that worth? That is probably worth, if you really sat down and thought about it, if we could get our leaders to communicate the strategy and values better, and it's our top 150 leaders, what's that worth? I reckon any CEO would go, that's probably worth $500,000. I was like, well, I'm not charging anywhere near that. Yeah. So, but if you'd like to pay me that for, some training workshops, but that's what it's worth.
Yeah, you're right. It's a perennial challenge for us in this world. The value equation, whether it's time and material or the impact that it can have, that is sometimes intangible, but can be very tangible on the top line, the bottom line, brand, reputation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not charging on time and not thinking about time. Yeah.
Ra, you've mentioned a couple of times, and I do want to pick up on this. So a little bit of an agenda from me around storytelling. And if anyone's watching the video, they'll know, they can see the books behind you. I think you said 7 books published on storytelling.
Yeah, but who's counting? Well, I am.
But who's counting?
I am clearly.
I'm counting because I've got one yet. And I do say yet because it's kind of in train. I'm really interested in tying these two concepts together, the stories that we tell ourselves and this concept of freedom of choice.
Yeah.
So I'd be really interested with your experience. What do you see leaders, organizations, what freedom, what stories could they have freedom from that are holding them back? And what would be better, more appropriate, more helpful stories to tell themselves?
Yeah, it's a really good insight. I think the stories we tell ourselves either help us or hinder us. They either hold us back or they propel us forward. And it's all the stories we tell ourselves. And normally it comes around the stories we tell ourselves making us feel comfortable, or we're making decisions based on other people. It's so I remember I was speaking to I was running a workshop, and there was a woman who had just, she'd just sort of come back from work. Her kids were 2 or 3. She was really struggling, really struggling. She was exhausted. And I was talking to her about, putting boundaries, we've talked about not working school holidays, but you could just go, I'm just not working Monday morning, or I'm not having meetings before 9:30 because or I'm finishing work at 5, or I'm taking my hour lunch break and going for a walk, whatever it is, it's setting boundaries. And because she talked about how she used to go to the gym all the time, but she hasn't had time to do any exercise herself. And she said to me, I just can't do it. I wouldn't be able to do it now. When the kids are older, that's when I'll prioritize my health. And when I hear stuff like that, that to me is really sad, because that's the story I can't do it at the moment is the story she's telling herself, where what's the real story? The real story perhaps is I don't have the courage to push back. That's potentially the real story. I remember when I went to Harvard about 7 years ago, it was on adaptive leadership, and we were there for about a week. It was one of those short executive education courses. And the lecturer, it was so challenging that every time you would say an answer, and we're all at Harvard, so we all think we're bloody smart and putting our hand up and saying something. And then he would just go, that could be true, or it could be a convenient story you're telling yourself. And it was just like, and so I think we go, I don't have time to exercise is a convenient story we're telling ourselves. What we're saying is we're not prioritizing. So in this instance, I would say that she felt, or she didn't have the courage to push back and say, no, I'm not available for meetings before 9 o'clock. Line in the sand. Now, of course, there'll be some exceptions to that, but if you don't draw the line in the sand. So I think it's stories like that are holding ourselves back from this financial freedom, or not financial freedom, like freedom of choice, freedom what we're doing. On the flip side, Pete, I've got my daughters now are 18 and 21, and my 21-year-old daughter was going for a job interview. So she's only been in the workforce for 4 or 5 months. So she had a 4-month contract, and she is just looking for other short-term contracts. And she's decided to work full-time and study part-time. So she was studying full-time, but has flipped it for the last year or so. And she was going for a job interview, and I asked her how she went, and she went, it went all right, but I don't think I'll get the job. And I went, why? And she goes, well, I asked them that I need Tuesday afternoons off because I've got uni, and they said, we're not sure if that we can give you that flexibility. And she went, well, then I'm probably not the right person for the job. So part of me was like, good on you for having boundaries. The other part of me was going, oh my God, I would never have thought to say that at 21. Yeah. But this generation are not, the stories they're telling themselves is, why can't I have flexibility from day one? Where our generation, the stories we told ourselves was, do crap jobs for 20 years and slowly move up, I don't want to do that, but you have to do it because that's what we told ourselves. So, so if you look at that example, my daughter's story, the story she's telling herself, well, I need flexibility, I want it, is serving her, and she's having the courage to ask for it.
Yeah. I love that idea, Ral, of a convenient story.
Yeah.
And in your experience working with leaders, humans, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
are there a series of common convenient stories that we put out there to prevent us from avoid, deny, mask certain fears, concerns, or worries? Are there other kind of common convenient stories that you've come across?
I think I don't have time is a very common convenient story. I didn't have the opportunity. Yep. So, for example, I often, when I do storytelling workshops, and we'll run the training, and they're sort of, okay, you now got to get out and share your story. And then I'll see them 6 weeks later, and we'll do the debrief, and I go, right, so how did sharing your story go? And it was like, I didn't have the opportunity. I haven't had the opportunity yet to share a story. And it was like going, and I just push back. I go, really?
Brilliant.
Right. So you haven't done a presentation in the last 6 weeks. You haven't met with a client in the last 6 weeks. You haven't had a team meeting in the last 6 weeks. You haven't had a mentoring or coaching session in the last 6 weeks. I have not had the opportunity is a very, very convenient story for I didn't have the courage to do it.
Yeah.
Even I don't have time can be, it's not a priority, or, what if I failed? So the opportunity, I've never had that opportunity. That's a convenient story we tell ourselves.
And I'm speculating here as well, Ral. How often do you think sitting beneath that convenient story, there's the I'm not good enough story?
Well, I think that's all, that I'm not good enough story, or I'm not, even going for job interviews, for example, it was like, I'm not ready for that, or is almost, or I don't have all the skills yet, or that's something I'll do in a few years' time. It could be the truth. So it could be the truth. But sometimes the real story, the closer to the story is, again, I'm not prepared to put myself out there in case I don't get it. Like in case I get rejected. That's, even look at things like asking someone out on a date. It was like the convenient story we tell ourselves is they probably wouldn't like me, or they're not my type, where probably the real story is I'm scared of rejection, which, we all are. No one likes to be rejected. But I think sometimes so what I learned when I went to Harvard is, if you just ask yourself, is that a convenient story you're telling yourself? And the more you ask that, the closer you'll get to the truth. And the truth could be, yeah, you're right, it's just not a priority, or I'm scared of rejection. And then if you're okay with that, that's fine. But just be aware that the convenient stories, and sometimes the convenient stories can serve you, like the delusional stories we tell ourselves. So it was like, I think I tell myself a lot of delusional stories, which gives me a lot of confidence to do something, where a lot of other people would go, oh God, I would never do that. Wouldn't that be embarrassing? And I would be going, how would that be embarrassing? Or just, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. All good.
Can you give me an example?
Oh God, a specific example. Just even the fact that I get up and get on stage, like in front of hundreds of people. 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, I did a stand-up comedy course, because, just like there's an art in telling a story, there's an art in telling a joke. And so I would always want to get better at speaking, and speaking in a way that's not only educational but entertaining. So I did a stand-up comedy course to learn the art of writing jokes and delivering jokes, but it coincided with doing a stand-up comedy gig. So you had to do a gig. And the amount of people that said, oh my God, I would never do that. That would be the most terrifying thing. What if no one laughed? And I just sort of went, well, I don't know, like I'm sure I'll be funny enough. And so, I just did it. I had my best friend would be terrified of that, and she wasn't even going to come and see me. She goes, I'm not going to come and see you because I'll be so nervous for you. And I go, why are you? I'm not even nervous for me. Why are you nervous for me? And she goes, I'll see you next time. I go, I'm not changing careers. I'm just doing this as a one-off. So, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just this delusional, if what could be the worst thing that could happen? Like, no one laughs. So what? That will create a funny story in itself.
Do you think you were born like that, or is your immersion in storytelling helping you with some of the helpful and hindering delusional stories?
I think the work I do around storytelling has sort of led me to understand this concept of the stories we tell ourselves, even though it's a very different, I guess, meaning around storytelling. I think I was raised. I think when I look at some of how I was raised, I'm one of 8 children, and my parents were very much give it a go. Just seriously, just give it a go. So we were always encouraged to just give things a crack, and if they didn't work out, don't give up, but just try something different. So we were always sort of encouraged to do that. My dad was very much, you would call my dad the ultimate feminist now, where he would, regardless of whether it was me or my brothers, we were taught the same thing. So he taught all of us how to change tires on the car. He taught all of us how to paint. He taught all of us how to, solder stuff. And like we learned everything because he just thought we should all learn how to do this. Some of it quite dangerous when I look back on it now, but that was the 60s and 70s. So no OH&S there. So I think it was a combination of my upbringing to just give something a crack, which I think then gives you confidence. I think confidence breeds confidence. So I think so.
And if you were helping so let's say, I come to you for a bit of help and I say, look, I'm trying to do this presentation, and you ask me a couple of questions, and we get to the point where I kind of go, right, my convenient story is I'm not funny, I'm not good enough, I'm not charismatic, whatever the delusional convenient story might be that's not helping me. Let's say we get to that point, and I can go, right, I'm not funny. And then you help me create this other story. Well, I am funny, right? Which is just the opposite. There's part of me that's going, but no matter what you tell me, Ral, I'm not funny, right? How do you help someone, I guess, park that, get over that, find a way around the deeper story that might never come out, but that's still there?
Yeah, look, it's Pete, it's interesting. I probably don't do a lot of work in that. So I would be on that situation, for example, I would be more helping you come up with the stories you could share in your presentation. I would be doing that. But if it arose that you would be going, but I'm probably not going to do this presentation anyway because of whatever. I would probably ask you, well, is that a convenient story you're telling yourself?
Yeah.
I have had the experience once where I was actually just sitting next to a woman who was, she had to give a presentation next week. And so I wasn't mentoring or anything, but I was just sitting next to her over dinner the week before. And she, was asking me what I did. And she went, oh my God, I've got to give a presentation. And she goes, and it's an after dinner event. So, and she goes, they're normally really boring and I just don't want them to be boring, but I'm not funny. And I go, well, everyone's funny because it's a different level of funniness. And I just sort of said, what? And she told me, she goes, every yearly event they have these, everyone's got up, spoken too long, and they've been really boring. And I've been sitting there going, I can't wait for this speech to get over because I just want to drink now. And I go, why don't you just start with that? I go, that would be funny because it's not going to be hilarious, like laughing, but it's going to be people going, oh my God, I've thought that the whole time. And it would just be funny enough for them to sort of then listen to you to go, well, maybe this is going to be different. And then I said, I mean, of course, then you've got to deliver on that. You can't open with that and then go on forever and be really boring. But it's just, it'd be finding those little, okay, so you might not be funny. You might not be a comedian. You might not be the funniest person in the room, but everyone can be their own version of funny or humorous, depending on the situation.
Yeah, when I reflect on some of the clients I've worked with over the years, trying to help them make this distinction about being funny or having fun.
Yeah.
As in, most of us who are not comedians might have the odd gag or joke, but that's not what we do. It's really an entry point into a conversation. And yet when you're in the pub or at dinner with your friends and family, what causes the most laughter is not necessarily the gags. It's just somebody says something normal. That's a contrast, or it's something they've misspelt or missaid. That creates the humor.
Yeah.
And so this distinction between telling gags and being funny as opposed to having fun, like you've just described, standing up and saying that very thing might create more energy, laughter, and connection and authenticity than the most perfectly scripted joke.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's not, and I don't think anyone should be trying to be funny. And it's also too, if you're not funny and if it doesn't come naturally, then don't try to be the funniest person in the world, because first of all, why are you trying to be? And again, you get back to convenient stories about, well, why are you trying to be funny? And because it'd be like, well, I don't know, because I thought if you present, you need to be funny. It's like, no, you don't at all. That's just one style. It's, and people have dry, oh, sorry, my phone. You should always turn your phone off when you're doing a podcast. That's not only a convenient story you tell yourself, but a probably very practical story.
Very practical story.
Yeah.
Ral, have you come across Ernest Hemingway's 6-word stories?
Yes, I have.
Is that a helpful frame?
Look,
is that too difficult for people?
I think in the storytelling that I teach, it's probably not that helpful. So for your listeners that don't know, the 6-word Hemingway story is, can you tell a story in 6 words? And it'd be like baby shoes, brand new, never worn.
Yeah, that's the classic, isn't it?
So that's the classic. So when you go, so now the listener or the reader interprets what happened. What happened, what was the baby never born? Or did they just buy the wrong size shoes? You don't know. So that to me is putting something out there, which very much is allowing the person to interpret what's the story behind that, the backstory. The storytelling that I work in business and in corporates is going, how do you communicate your message more effectively through stories? So it's got to be a bit more direct than the 6-word Hemingway story.
Yeah. And so if I came to you and said, I want to communicate the values better, or, tell the strategy better, is there any top pocket tips you could offer people about how to do that?
Yeah, look, my key and where I go in is when we share stories in business, we tend to share business stories, which is fine, but it's the default. So if we want to be known as a brand around innovative, we will tell stories about how we've been innovative in the past, like we would, which is fine. But they stories tend to be more case studies as opposed to stories, which can still be valuable, but they're probably not as powerful as stories. So the work I do is, let's just say one of your examples is innovative or integrity. It's working with leaders going, so what does that mean to you? What does innovative mean to you? Don't worry about what the company have said it means. What does it mean to you? And helping them be really clear, and then helping them find a personal story to communicate that. So, and what I find is when I go into organizations and run storytelling training, and I'll say to a leader, okay, so we're using the values, and they go, what value did you pick? And they go, I picked integrity because it's really important to me. I go, okay, right. So in your own words, tell me what that means. And they'll go, respect. I go, yep. What else? It's being truthful. And I was like, okay. And then this is when I go, you can use more than one word, but they go, so it could be, it means, if you say you're going to do something, do it. I go, okay, great. What else does it mean? And then they'll normally go, gee, you've put me on the spot here. I haven't really thought about it this much before. And that, I think, is ultimately one of the biggest mistakes we make in business, is when we're rolling out strategy, values, we go, okay, these are our 4 values and this is what it means. But the leaders aren't given the space to say, what does it mean to me personally? And then once I've made that connection of what that means to me personally, so if you say you're going to do something, do it. What's a personal story that you could share to communicate that? And because you're going to have work-related stories, which are fine, but what's a personal story that shows that this value is really important to you? And also, find a time in your personal life, as in it didn't happen at work, which demonstrates that value. So whether you've lived that value or you haven't lived that value. So if I just looked at that value of integrity, and, you know, for me on a personal level and my business, if you say you're going to do something, do it, I would go, well, what's a personal story and a work story that you could use to demonstrate that? But I'll give you a quick example of both, because I think it highlights the power in them. So a work-related story could be, you know, quite a few years ago, I had a potential client who rang and spoke about this conference they wanted me to do. They asked if I was available on the date. I said yes. I said, but we'll keep it as a tentative, but we need for you to confirm the date. And we followed them up once or twice and they never got back. And this was months ago. And then I was booking a trip to America, and it was like, well, we never heard back from them. Now, we should have probably tried one more time, but we just assumed that it wasn't going ahead because, you know, I think we had tried twice, but so I assumed it wasn't going ahead. And then after I booked my flights to America, they came back and you know, said, so we're all locked in for that date. And it was like, hey, whoa. Yeah, like nothing was confirmed. And they're going, no, well, we assumed it was confirmed from our end. Now, I could have had a fight. I could have whatever. And I said, you know what? I just deferred my flight. I just changed it. I think I had to change it by a day or two. So because in my mind, there was some form of commitment on my behalf. And so I was going to commit to that. So, I mean, that's a story of me living and breathing my values, which is, you know, okay, good on me. Look at me. Look how great I am type thing. But now I want to give you an example of a personal story. Where I didn't live the value. And I think you'll experience the power in it. So if we're talking about, if you say you're going to do something, do it, which is important to me. I remember when my daughter Jess, she was about 10 and she was in swimming, you know, a little swimming school thing. It was just an inside small school sport. And she said, Mum, can you come and watch me swim? And I said, yes, I can. And so I was there. I made it in time and I got to the swimming thing and proceeded to speak to all the parents. And unbeknownst to me, Jess was on the starting blocks to start her race and was yelling at me to get my attention. And I did not hear because I was talking. She got to the end to do the tumble turn at the end where I was only sitting probably a few meters away. And instead of just doing the tumble turn, she actually stopped and yelled out, Mum. And I looked at her and all I could see was just a combination of anger and real disappointment and she just then kept swimming. And at the end, she goes, I was trying to get your attention. You weren't even watching me. And it doesn't matter how I said, no, I did see you. It was gone. The moment was gone. And that, I mean, that was 10 years ago and I can still see her little face of disappointment. So it's sharing stories of when you haven't lived the values that that I think are way more powerful when you have lived the values, and sharing personal stories that show that this is actually a really important personal value that I have. And of course, then it moves over to my business, the way I run business, but it's the personal story that's more powerful and impactful than the work story.
So and I felt the difference there, Raoul. Thank you for sharing that. For the listener then, what are there any simple distinctions between whether it's personal or professional, the story that you told at the start there versus the story that you've just told? What are the kind of simple differences? You know, you and I could unpick that 2-minute version and go, there was this language, there was this,
Yeah.
for the simplicity of it. Are there main differences between what makes a story work and what makes it impactful?
Yeah, so I think some of the most powerful stories is when you show vulnerability. And so showing vulnerability is pretty much saying, I didn't get it right. And or this was, even if you did do it right, like even if it was a story of when you did live the value, it could be a story around how hard it was and how challenging it was, because, we all don't live our values 100% of the time. So sharing stories about how you made you feel and regretted. So I think that's a distinction. Besides, sometimes more with a case study, it was like, this is what the problem was, and this is what we did, and this is what we achieved, and this was the outcome, which I can learn a lot of that, but it's not emotive. It's not emotive. So vulnerability brings in emotion. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do is tap into emotion. And when I say emotion, it's not like emotional, like we're not deliberately sharing stories to make people get emotional or cry, but the outcome of a story is I attach it to emotion. So it triggers emotion. So it helps me visualize something. It helps me feel something. So that's when we talk about emotion, it just helps me feel something, and I connect with it. We'll often talk about, when people go, I really connected with your story, they're saying connected because they felt something. And that's what I mean by emotion as opposed to emotional. And I think some of the really important things when you're sharing stories in a business context is they've got to be really succinct. So my bit of rule of thumb is 1 to 2 minutes. Once you're going over 2 minutes, and especially when you're sharing a personal story, people they will start to think, get to the point. And the moment anyone's thinking get to the point, you're losing them. So you're absolutely losing them. I think they've got to be absolutely authentic. Like they just got to be. Some people go, well, as long as it gets the point across, what's the harm done? But there's a massive amount of harm done, because it's just, and when you retell a story, you don't just retell it, you relive it. So it's got to be succinct, really short. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be relatable. And what I mean by relatable is because we do have a connection. So my story about, like, my daughter Jess and not being at her swimming but not being present is it's not this big life-changing moment but it's a story that we've probably all been guilty of in some, when we've sort of said we'd do something but didn't, or was there but not present. So it's those little day-to-day ones that make your stories really relatable, and that's important.
A distinction for me, Ral, that I picked up for me as you've talked there is the difference between reliving it and retelling it.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
When it's a personal story and it's true and it means something important to you, you don't just retell it, you relive it. And you relive it because you feel the emotions. And again, if it's like a very practical story, like a case study or a work story, we tend to retell, and it's just almost regurgitating the information. Reliving it means you feel the emotion again, which means people sense the emotion. So look, every time I tell that story about Jess, like it's not, I'm not crying or anything, I'm not getting emotional, but I can feel it. I can absolutely feel it. And when I share it, the people hearing it can sort of sense my own disappointment in myself. So that's why the reliving, and I think that brings it, the authenticity to it as well. As a family, we've got and I've shared a few stories myself about this, a bit of a family ritual. We watch things like The Voice, Australia's Got Talent, not because it's a bit of family entertainment, but I find it fascinating when you hear the judges comment about someone who delivered a brilliant song, but I didn't quite believe you. Right? You've got a great pitch, but it was a bit cold. And I wonder if people really, I think they get it, they feel it, but they maybe can't articulate it. And I'm wondering if that's the same in business, where people are sometimes, your distinction, they're retelling it, but there's just an edge of authenticity, genuineness, felt experience in it, that if they did that,
not only would they feel it and relive it, but the audience would feel it and therefore live it too.
Yeah, I agree. There's something in the way, it's not only the story, but it's the way it's delivered.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it comes down to the story's got to be authentic, so it's got to be true. But I think you also got to believe in the message. So to me, authenticity is two parts to it. It's the story's got to be true. Yeah. But it's got to be true for you, as it's got to be congruent with what you really believe. And you see this sometimes where leaders might get up and share a personal story around the importance of work-life balance. You're sitting there going, but that's crap, because you don't do that. Like you are the opposite of that. So it's just, there's something missing. And with authenticity, sometimes you can't put your finger on it, but you know that something's not quite right. And I think that, like your example of the voice, where it was like, there's probably where they're going, I just sense that it wasn't truly you. So I think there's got to be congruence, is you have to believe in the message. You've got to believe what you're talking about. So if you're talking about integrity and sharing stories, then you've got to truly believe that. And I think if you get the congruence right and the story's true and it means something to you, then that's when it will come across as really authentic. And then when it's really authentic, people believe it, people create a connection, they'll remember it, they learn a lot more about you. There's all the science with storytelling shows that you not only connect to the story, but you also connect to the storyteller. So that's the science part of storytelling. So there's a huge amount of research done by
there is
very smart people, neuroscientists.
Fascinating.
It's
fascinating, isn't it?
Amazing.
I'm maybe opening up a can of worms here, Ral, and I know we've kind of chatted for a long time, but I'm going to do it anyway. So imagine I'm a second-tier manager, I'm a GM, an AGM, and the strategies come down from above, however it's been created, whether it's bottom up, top down, from our parent in Europe, however it is. And I don't quite get it. I don't quite believe it. I don't quite like it. But my role has a responsibility to share the story, to share the narrative. But we're making the same mistake. Whatever the rationale is, that I'm sitting here feeling a little bit incongruent. Yeah. But my role demands I've got to be congruent.
Yep. Yeah, perfect.
How could you offer any advice in dealing with that dilemma?
Yeah, I've seen this happen a lot, where
all the time, right?
People going, okay, we've been told we've got to implement this strategy, but there's part of me that doesn't believe it. Part of me thinks perhaps this is not going to work. So I would say in that situation, your message changes. So the message isn't around how great the strategy is because you don't believe it. Maybe the message is, let's give this a go. And you're being honest that I am not 100% convinced myself, but the rest of the leadership team is, or the board is. So maybe there's something in this. So let's give it a go and give it 100% and see what happens. And maybe I'm wrong. So there's a story around that. There could also be a story around accepting the umpire's decision. It was like, we're in a company and not all of us have to agree on this, but if we're playing the game, we have to accept the umpire's decision. We have to accept the rule. So there could be, that's not going to be your motivational rah, rah, rah story, but, strategy very rarely is, and even when they are, they're the ones that seem inauthentic. So I think it's finding the message that you're comfortable with, and so I've done this a lot with senior execs. I go, well, maybe not senior execs because they're probably on board, but the next level down is your message is changing to, let's give this a go and see what happens.
And do you find, I had a question in mind and it's just slipped my mind for a second. In those situations, is it better, do you think, to do that? Or is it better to not even communicate anything at this point? Is it better to say, I'm unsure, I'm not quite aligned yet? Because the reason I'm asking, the question that I had in my mind was, so often I'll chat with, and like you, coach and speak to leaders about, and the request they make on what they're trying to do is get buy-in.
Yeah.
Right. I'm telling a story to get buy-in. Now, I have a personal view, which I'll share in a second. Is buy-in binary, or is it on a continuum?
I think it's on a continuum. So I think so going back, I think it's you should communicate. So I think the worst case scenario is, okay, you got to communicate this message. You don't believe in it, but you just pretty much lie and say, oh, this is going to be good, but you don't believe in it, because that's got failure written all over it. Not communicating anything's got failure written all over it. And especially in this day and age where we go, oh, I'm not going to communicate until I've got all the answers, or until I'm fully committed to it. It was like, things are changing so bloody fast these days that's not even practical anymore. So I think you communicate exactly what you're thinking, to say, look, I still have doubts about this, but we're moving through it, and it keeps evolving. So, the story becomes about that. And then I would go, I'm sure you've had heaps of times in your life where you haven't had all the answers, but you've taken the first step. I mean, having children, getting married, taking on a new job, moving overseas. None of those situations we were fully in and knew all the answers. It was just like, okay, well, let's just take a step and see how it goes. So I would go share a story about that, which we do in our personal lives all the time. So what we're asking now maybe in this business situation is no different to that. It's no different to that. It's just saying, look, let's just give it a go.
Well, it's been fascinating chatting to you. I think stories are omnipotent across everything everyone does just all of the time. And being aware of them, you've certainly raised some questions and some insights about how one might be more aware of them. I might finish, if it's okay with you, with some lighter questions that you perhaps don't know are coming.
Okay, let's go for it.
The first one would be really easy. What's, are you sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise, as in I'm a better morning person. I'm a better morning person than at night. I go to bed early. But if I had to, if you gave me a choice of, do I want to watch the sunrise or watch the sunset, I would choose watching the sunset.
Interesting. What's a story you live your life by?
Story I live my life by is give it a crack, because what's the worst thing that could happen?
Okay. Do you prefer stories with clear endings or ambiguous endings?
In my line of work, I like stories with clear endings.
Okay. What's a book that's changed your life?
I'd have to say it's Stephen Denning's book on organizational storytelling, because I read it about 20 years ago, and it was Stephen Denning's senior exec at the World Bank. And it's when I read that, I thought, if a senior exec at the World Bank has written a book on storytelling, I think there's something in this. So it was at that moment where I was thinking, I think there's something in storytelling and teaching people in organizations to use story. So that was the book that gave me, I think, the confidence to go, yep, you're right, there's something in this.
Which, fascinates me. Here we are in Australia recording this podcast, which the Indigenous community have lived centuries with storytelling.
Yeah, well, tens and tens of thousands of years. So, like, if you need no other indication of the power of storytelling, you just have to look at our First Nations Dreamtime stories, where messages have been passed on for literally tens and tens of thousands of years, all through a story.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to pause on that. I really appreciate, one, your time, and two, just some of the insights, and particularly some of the vulnerable stories you've shared with us. I'm sure the listeners will have fascination around retelling and re-listening to the podcast this afternoon.
Thanks, Pete. Love talking to you.
Thanks, Ral.